Under the frost-laced moon, a sickle's edge gleamed like a forgotten promise, cutting through the veil between earth and exile. Brienne Holt gripped the worn handle of her sickle, its iron cool against her calloused palm, as the wind howled across the frost-bitten fields of Eldridge Hollow. At 22, she had known no other world than these endless stretches of white and gray, where the soil yielded barley in summer and silence in winter. The air bit like teeth, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant smoke from the village hearths. Her breath fogged before her, a fragile cloud in the deepening dusk, as she harvested the last stubborn stalks before the first heavy snows buried them forever. The hollow was a forgotten corner of the realm, tucked against the jagged spine of the Ironfang Mountains, where omegas like her scraped by on the fringes of alpha rule. No grandpacks here, no thrones of ice or howling councils, just families bound by blood and the unyielding rhythm of the seasons. Brienne's own kin had dwindled to her widowed mother and a handful of cousins, their lives a quiet defiance against the taxes that drained the land like blood from a vein. She moved with the grace of one who had learned to listen to the earth, her dark hair braided tight against the wind, her hazel eyes sharp as the blade she wielded. Strength, she had always thought, was in the swing of this tool, in the quiet rebellion of filling silos against the crown's greed. But tonight, the wind carried more than chill. It whispered of approaching shadows. Hoofbeats thrummed like a distant heartbeat, growing louder until they shattered the evening's hush. Riders crested the ridge, their cloaks snapping like banners of storm, armored in steel etched with the silver wolf of the Alpha King's sigil. Tax enforcers, come early this year, their eyes gleaming with the hunger of men who collected not just coin, but fear. Brienne straightened, sickle in hand, as the lead rider, a burly beta with a scar twisting his lip, dismounted. "Holt lands," he barked, his voice rough as gravel. "The king's due, grain, livestock, all of it. Or we take what we need." Her mother emerged from the thatched cottage, face pale but set, clutching a ledger of meager tallies. "We've paid what we can. The frost took half the crop. Mercy for the hollow." "Mercy?" The beta laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "The king wars on the borders. Treaties shatter like glass. You think your frost excuses tribute?" His men fanned out, seizing sacks from the barn, prodding the thin herd of goats with spear tips. Brienne's blood surged, hot against the cold. She stepped forward, sickle lowered but firm. "Take the grain if you must, but leave the goats. The young will starve without them." The beta's gaze slid over her, lingering with the crude appraisal all omegas knew too well. "Feisty for a field rat. What's your name, girl?" "Brienne Holt." Her voice held steady, though her heart pounded like thunder in her chest. He smirked, signaling his men. Chaos erupted then, the clash of pails, the bleat of animals, a cousin shoved to the mud. When one enforcer yanked her mother by the arm, demanding hidden stores, Brienne's restraint snapped. But before she could intervene, the beta's hand clamped on her wrist, twisting the sickle free. "You'll do for the fortress labor pools. King Ryden needs hands for the walls and mouths to feed the war machine." Exile came not as a banishment decree, but as iron snapping around her ankles, the bite of rope binding her wrists to the saddle of a spare horse. Her mother's cry echoed as they dragged Brienne into the night, the hollow shrinking to a smear of light behind the rising veil of snow. The wind clawed at her thin woolen cloak, flakes stinging her cheeks like accusations. What was this, if not rejection? Not by mate or pack, but by the land itself, the life she had tilled with her own sweat. The moon watched impassive overhead, its silver light pooling on the snow like spilled milk, a symbol of fates unwritten yet inexorable. The journey blurred into hours of jolting torment, the enforcers' torches flickering like malevolent eyes. Mountains loomed, their peaks crowned in eternal ice, and the air grew thinner, laced with the metallic tang of altitude. Vividos distant pierced the gale, wolves, or perhaps the souls of the lost, calling to kin. Brienne's body ached, the cold seeping into her bones, but her mind raced with fragments of lore whispered by village elders. The Alpha King's fortress, a bastion of stone and shadow at the realm's heart, where Raiden Vale ruled with a fist of iron and a gaze haunted by ghosts. At 36, the king was legend wrapped in rumor, a warrior forged in border skirmishes, his treaties as brittle as the ice that armored his halls. They said guilt marked him deeper than any scar, the weight of fallen packs bowing his shoulders. But to Brienne, he was abstraction, a distant tyrant whose wars starved the hollows. Dawn bled gray across the sky when the fortress came into view, rising from the mist like a slumbering beast. Walls of hewn granite, veined with frost, stretched skyward, topped by battlements where sentries paced like specters. The gates groaned open, iron teeth admitting the riders, and Brienne was hauled into a courtyard slick with melting snow. The air hummed with activity, smiths hammering, guards barking orders, the low rumble of chained prisoners being sorted like chattel. She was shoved toward a holding pen, the irons clanking against stone, her breath ragged. A guard, his face half hidden by a helm, eyed her. Rural Omega, you'll mend walls or warm beds. King's choice. Brienne lifted her chin, tasting blood from a split lip, the moon's pale echo lingering in her vision. In that moment, the sickle's absence burned like a phantom limb, a symbol of the life stripped away. Exile was not just the hollow's loss, it was the unraveling of self, thread by thread, under the indifferent gaze of power. Yet deep in her chest, a spark flickered, unseen, unnamed, waiting for the lunar fire to ignite it. The gates clanged shut behind her, sealing her into the fortress's maw, where duty and desire waged their silent war. The stone courtyard of the fortress echoed with the clamor of chains and barked commands, a symphony of subjugation that clawed at Brienne's resolve. Hours had blurred since dawn, the gray light yielding to a pallid afternoon where snow flurries danced like restless spirits. She huddled in the holding pen with a dozen other souls, hollow folk like her, their faces etched with the hollow's same weary defiance. The air reeked of damp iron and unwashed fear, undercut by the sharp tang of forge smoke drifting from the armory. Her wrists still bore the raw chafe of ropes, now replaced by a rough iron cuff linked to the pen's bars, a reminder that freedom here was as illusory as summer in the mountains. A guard with a whip coiled at his belt unlocked the gate, his eyes scanning the group like a wolf picking the weakest. You lot, stonework detail, the king's walls crave mortar and muscle, move, or the lash will. He thrust a bundle of tools through the bars, picks, trowels, and among them, a sickle, rusted but keen, meant for trimming frozen vines that snaked the battlements. Brienne's pulse quickened at the sight, her fingers itching for its familiar weight. She snatched it before another could, the handle's curve fitting her palm like an old lover's grasp. Not her own, lost to the raiders, but kin enough to stir the earth's whisper in her veins. They were herded through arched corridors, veined with torchlight, the flames casting elongated shadows that twisted like accusations on the frost-veined walls. The fortress's heart pulsed with war's machinery. Hammers rang on anvils, shaping blades that would drink blood under distant moons. Low voices plotted in alcoves, treaties fracturing like thin ice. Brienne's boots scraped against flagstones slick with melt, each step pulling her deeper into this labyrinth of power, where the wind's howl outside mingled with muffled sobs from unseen cells. The worksite sprawled along the outer ramparts, a jagged scar against the Iron Fang's flank. Guards prodded them to the base of a half-built tower, where masons directed the mixing of lime and gravel. Brienne was paired with an elder Omega, a frail woman named Ilara from a neighboring glen, her hands trembling as she hefted a bucket of sludge. "Easy now," Brienne murmured, steadying her. "We've breath in our lungs yet." Ilara's eyes, clouded with cataracts, held a flicker of gratitude, but fear lurked beneath, sharp as the wind slicing through gaps in the stone. As the afternoon waned, the sky bruising to twilight's indigo, a commotion stirred at the yard's edge. Another group of captives, poachers caught in the border woods, was dragged in, their faces bloodied from resistance. One, a young beta with defiant eyes, stumbled under a guard's boot. The enforcer, the same scarred beta from the hollow, laughed as he raised his fist. "Teach this cur manners before the king sees him." Ilara gasped, spilling her bucket, the mortar splattering like pale blood across the snow-dusted ground. The beta turned, his gaze locking on her spill. "Clumsy wretch, you'll pay for that waste." His boot lashed out, catching Ilara's side, sending her crumpling with a pained cry that pierced the gale. Rage ignited in Brienne's core, hot and unbidden, drowning the cold that had numbed her since the raid. The sickle was in her hand before thought could temper it, a tool of harvest turned weapon of heart. She swung not at the man, but at the stone flags between them, the blade biting deep with a resonant crack that silenced the yard. Sparks flew, brief as shooting stars, and the ground trembled faintly, as if the earth itself protested. "Touch her again," Brienne's voice cut through the hush, low and laced with the hollow's unyielding timbre, "and you'll reap what you sow in pieces." The beta whirled, face purpling, but his retort died unspoken. From the rampart's shadow, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in midnight fur edged with silver wolf embroidery, his presence a sudden gravity that bent the air. Alpha King Ryden Vale. At 36, he bore the weight of realms in his frame, broad shoulders scarred beneath leather armor, dark hair streaked with premature frost at the temples, eyes like storm-forged steel, shadowed by the guilt of battles won at too great a cost. He had been overseeing the wall's progress, his silhouette etched against the dying light, but now he descended the steps with measured strides, the wind tugging at his cloak like supplicants at a throne. The yard froze, guards straightened, captives bowed their heads. Ryden's gaze swept the scene, lingering on the cracked stone, the sickle still quivering in Brienne's grip. Their eyes met, hers hazel and fierce, his a tempest of restrained fury and something deeper, unspoken. In that instant, a jolt seared through her, visceral as lunar fire licking her veins. Instinct roared to life, a pull, magnetic and raw, threading between them like invisible silver cords. Her breath hitched, the world narrowing to the heat of his proximity, the faint scent of pine smoke and bloodied earth clinging to him. He felt it too. She saw it in the subtle flinch of his jaw, the way his hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, as if denying an ancient call. "Who dares such provocation in my fortress?" His voice was a low rumble, carrying the melancholy of one who had commanded armies yet lost kin to their blades. It wrapped around her, stirring curiosity laced with terror, not of his power, but of this unwelcome tether, incomplete and volatile, born of defiance rather than desire. The beta stammered, "Sire." This rural omega, she struck the floor, defending a fool's spill. "Insolence." Ryden silenced him with a raised hand, stepping closer to Brienne. The air thickened, charged with the moon's rising pallor filtering through clouds. Up close, his face bore the map of guilt, a faint scar tracing his cheek, eyes haunted by treaties that crumbled like ash. "Your name," he demanded, though his tone held not wrath, but a probing curiosity, as if she were a riddle etched in the snow. "Brienne Holt," she replied, chin lifted, though fear coiled in her gut like frostbite's bite. The bond hummed, denied by her will, rationalized as trick of the cold, yet it lingered, instinctive, drawing her toward the very cage she resisted. He studied her, the sickle, the crack in the stone, a symbol now of fractures in the realm's brittle order. "You defend the weak with a farmer's blade, bold, or foolish. His words masked the pull, but his gaze betrayed it, flickering with the war between duty and this unforeseen flame. As dusk deepened, Weavios echoed from the peaks, a chorus to the unfolding bond. Ryden turned, signaling guards. Take her to the inner quarters, not for labor, for questioning. The rest, to work. Brienne was unchained from the group, led away under his watchful eye, the fortress's shadows swallowing them both. Fear warred with curiosity in her chest, the sickle confiscated, yet its echo resounding. What refuge could exist in the lair of a king, when the moon itself seemed to weave their fates in silver threads? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The inner quarters of the fortress unfolded like a vein of shadow within the stone beast, corridors lit by sputtering torches that painted the walls in flickering gold and amber, their smoke curling upward like unspoken prayers to the indifferent moon. Brienne's guards escorted her through a labyrinth of arched doorways, the air growing warmer, laced with the scent of aged wood and beeswax, a stark contrast to the biting chill of the ramparts. Her heart thrummed against her ribs, each beat echoing the unresolved hum of that jolt. The bond's insidious whisper, rationalized as the strain of captivity, nothing more. Yet it lingered, a silver thread tugging at her core, drawing her toward the king even as she willed it away. They halted before a heavy oak door banded in iron, its surface etched with the snarling wolf sigil, now softened by the torchlight's glow. One guard rapped sharply, and from within came Ryden's voice, low and commanding. Enter. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a chamber vast yet intimate, its high ceiling lost in gloom, walls draped in tapestries depicting ancient battles under lunar skies, wolves tearing at foes amid swirling snow. A fire crackled in a hearth of black marble, its flames dancing like captive spirits, casting deep red hues across fur rugs and a long table strewn with maps marked by ink stains and wax seals. The warmth seeped into Brienne's chilled skin, but it did little to thaw the knot of defiance in her chest. Ryden stood by the fire, his cloak discarded, revealing the fitted leather armor scarred from countless clashes, deep blue edged in silver, clinging to a frame honed by war's relentless forge. At 36, he carried the melancholy of a ruler who had bartered peace with blood, his dark eyes reflecting the hearth's glow like storm clouds lit by lightning. He turned as she entered, the bond flaring anew, a visceral pull that made her breath catch, her hazel gaze locking with his in unwitting challenge. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair upholstered in deep gray wool, his tone measured, stripped of the yard's authority, yet laced with the weight of unspoken guilt. Brienne hesitated, the irons removed but her wrists still raw, a phantom ache mirroring the exile's deeper wound. She lowered herself warily, the chair's embrace too soft, too confining, like the fortress itself, a refuge that reeked of cages. Questioning, you said. For striking stone, or for being from the hollows? He poured amber liquid from a decanter into 2 goblets, the glug of it steady against the fire's snap, and slid one across the table. Both, and more. He took the opposite seat, his movements deliberate, as if every gesture warred with the instinct roaring beneath. Up close, the scent of him enveloped her. Pine smoke, iron-tanged earth, and a faint undercurrent of blood from some recent fray, stirring curiosity despite the fear coiling in her gut. That crack you made. It runs deeper than the eye sees. The mason's whisper of unstable foundations. Your sickle found a fault the king's engineers missed. She sipped the liquid, mead warm and honeyed, burning a path to her belly, and met his gaze steadily. Luck of the fields, the earth speaks if you listen. But even as she spoke, the bond thrummed, instinctive, urging empathy where resistance should reign. She saw the fractures in him now, the subtle hunch of shoulders bowed by brittle treaties, the guilt etching lines around his mouth. A king who had lost brothers to border wars he could not end. Before he could respond, a distant clamor shattered the chamber's hush, shouts echoing from the corridors, followed by the clash of steel and a guttural roar that vibrated through the stone. Ryden's head snapped toward the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his belt. "Stay," he commanded, but his eyes betrayed the pull, a flicker of protectiveness that mirrored her own rising alarm. The door burst open, admitting a breathless beta messenger, his face smeared with soot and a gash weeping red across his brow. "Sire, intruders in the lower halls, conspirators from the eastern packs, striking at the armory. They bear the rival's mark, the crimson talon of Lord Kale. Sabotage the walls, they say, to shatter your treaties once and for all." Ryden's face hardened, steel-gray eyes flashing with the melancholy resolve of one who knew betrayal's bite all too well. "How many?" he demanded, rising like a shadow uncoiling. 24, armed with smuggled blades. They've breached the outer gates, using the very faults in the stone. The messenger's gaze darted to Brienne, suspicion narrowing his eyes, but Ryden waved it aside. In that instant, the chamber felt smaller, the fire's warmth turning oppressive as the bond surged, hot and unbidden. Brienne felt it then, not just pull, but a shared pulse, her rural instincts aligning with his warrior's vigilance. Outside, the wind howled in fury, whipping snow against the narrow windows, while Wevios rose from the peaks, a wild chorus warning of blood under the moon. Ryden strapped on his sword, the blades whisper a silken threat. "Bar the door behind me. Guards will come." But as he moved to leave, a deeper rumble shook the floor, the armory's explosion, muffled yet visceral, sending dust sifting from the rafters like ash from a dying star. Shouts grew nearer, footsteps pounding like heartbeats in the night. Fear clawed at Brienne. But so did something fiercer. The earth's murmur, faint but insistent, guiding her gaze to a tapestry's edge where shadows concealed a seam in the wall. Her latent sense stirred, unawakened yet whispering of hidden paths, born of hollow lore and lunar blood. "Wait," she said, standing, the mead's fire in her veins steadying her voice. "Not that way. The conspirators will anticipate the main halls. There's a passage, behind the wolf's eye in the weave." He paused, turning, the bond bridging the space between them like moonlight on frost. Skepticism warred with intrigue in his expression, but the empathy bloomed. Her defiance no longer provocation, but a thread of salvation in his fractured realm. "How do you know this?" "The stone speaks," she replied, stepping closer, her hand brushing the tapestry. The touch ignited a spark, the fabric parting to reveal a narrow crevice, cool air rushing out like a held breath. As it did on the ramparts. Trust flickered in his eyes, raw and resisted, rationalized as tactical necessity, yet deepening into something visceral. Together, they slipped into the passage, the darkness swallowing them, torchlight fading behind. The air grew damp, laced with the mineral tang of mountain depths, their breaths sinking in the confined space, his steady, hers quickened by proximity. Echoes of chaos pursued, clashes of steel, cries cut short by blades, the acrid bite of smoke seeping through cracks. They emerged into a forgotten antechamber, its walls veined with ice like frozen tears, overlooking the armory's lower level through a grated vent. Below, shadows darted, conspirators in crimson cloaks, torches flaring red as they torched powder kegs, flames licking upward in hungry tongues. Ryden's hand found her arm, steadying, the contact sending lunar fire through her veins, empathy forging the bond tighter. Not desire, not yet, but alliance born of shared peril, her rural resilience mirroring his dutiful melancholy. "Alert the sentries from here," he murmured, his voice a rumble against her ear, warm breath stirring her hair. "We'll turn their sabotage against them." As he signaled through the grate, pulling a concealed lever that unleashed a cascade of loosened stones, echoing her earlier crack, Brienne felt the shift, fear yielding to purpose, curiosity to a tentative trust. The bond hummed, no longer denied but navigated, a bridge over the chasm of their worlds. Yet as the conspirators scattered, one lingered, his face twisting in recognition under the torchlight. Lord Kael's spy, eyes gleaming with the promise of deeper betrayals. He locked gazes with Ryden through the bars, mouthing a curse that spoke of wars reignited, treaties dissolved in blood. The king tensed, guilt shadowing his features anew, the weight of a realm fracturing under his rule. In the silence that followed, as guards swarmed below, Brienne pulled away slightly, the warmth of his touch lingering like a brand. Refuge had found them, but at what cost? Strength, she pondered amid the dying echoes, was not in wielding the blade, but in choosing alliance when isolation whispered louder. The moon filtered through a high slit, silvering their faces, a silent witness to the bond's fragile bloom, redemption's first ember in the fortress's cold heart. The antechamber's gloom clung like a shroud, the grated vent's iron bars framing the chaos below as guards overpowered the last conspirators, their crimson cloaks pooling like spilled blood on the flagstones. Brienne's pulse echoed the fading clashes, her skin prickling from the stone's chill, and the king's lingering touch, a warmth that warred with the bond's insistent thrum, now a steady undercurrent rather than a jolt. She stepped back, hazel eyes tracing the frost-veined walls, where moonlight slanted through the high slit like a silver blade, illuminating motes of dust that swirled in their wake. The air hung heavy with smoke's acrid bite, mingling with the metallic tang of fresh spilled life, a reminder that refuge was fleeting in this fortress of fractured oaths. Ryden sheathed his sword with a rasp that cut the silence, his broad frame silhouetted against the vent's glow, shoulders taut under the leather scarred by too many betrayals. At 36, his face bore the etchings of a ruler who had forged peace from pyres, yet guilt shadowed his steel-gray eyes, deepening the lines carved by brittle treaties and lost kin. He turned to her, the bond bridging the scant space between them. Empathy forged in peril, now laced with something sharper, recognition, perhaps, of the earth's quiet wisdom in her rural frame. "You saw the passage where my scouts see only stone," he said, voice a low rumble like distant thunder over snowfields. "How? No map marks it. No lore speaks of such seams." Brienne's fingers brushed the wall's rough surface, feeling the subtle pulse beneath, veins of quartz humming faintly as if the mountain itself breathed in rhythm with the rising moon. She had always sensed the land's secrets in the hollow, roots twisting toward hidden springs, soil shifting before storms. But here, in the fortress's depths, it bloomed fiercer, unbidden, a latent fire stirring in her blood. "It's no gift of maps," she murmured, her breath fogging the chill air. "The earth, it whispers paths to those who listen, like the crack I struck, a fault waiting to be found." Curiosity flickered in her chest, overriding the fear that coiled tighter with each revelation, for this sense pulled her deeper into his world, where duty and desire blurred like mist on ice. He studied her, the fire's distant roar from the armory underscoring his silence, his gaze probing as if she were a treaty he could not decipher. The bond hummed, resisted yet undeniable, rationalized as shared survival, but it wove empathy into her defiance, softening the edges of her exile's ache. Outside, the wind howled through the slit's narrow frame, carrying Weavios from the Iron Fang peaks, a lunar chorus that seemed to call her name. As the shouts below ebbed to murmurs of containment, a deeper tremor rippled through the stone, not from explosion, but from within. A subtle shift, like the mountain exhaling a long-held secret. Brienne's vision sharpened, the world tilting as her Pathfinder sense awakened fully, a rush of silver light flooding her veins, lunar and visceral. It was no mere instinct. It was revelation, the Deuce's touch uncoiling in her core, revealing hidden loyalties etched in the rock's memory. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, and images bloomed, not visions, but sensations, the passage they had taken, branching into forgotten tunnels laced with the scent of treason. Footsteps echoed in her mind, not current but past, spies slipping through these veins months ago, bearing Lord Kael's crimson talon, whispering poisons into the ears of eastern pack lords. Hidden doors, concealed by illusion of solid stone, led to the king's private council chamber, where maps of brittle treaties lay vulnerable. And deeper still, a chamber of lunar relics, guarded by ancient wards that now flickered, weakened by sabotage. Her breath quickened, the cold seeping deeper as the bond amplified it all. Raiden's guilt surging through her like shared blood, his melancholy a weight she felt in her bones. The conspirators. They're not alone, she gasped, pulling her hand away as if burned, the quartz's hum fading to a whisper. These walls hold more than stone. Passages to the East Wing, used by Kael's agents. They've mapped your weaknesses, the treaty's vaults, the armory's backroutes. And there's a symbol. A silver wolf etched in ice, masking a door to your inner sanctum. Raiden's face paled under the moon's pallor, his hand clenching at his side, the scar on his cheek stark against the sudden pallor. He stepped closer, the air between them charged, his pine smoke scent enveloping her like a cloak against the chill. Pathfinder, he breathed, the word a revelation in itself, ancient lore from the Deuce's temples. Omegas marked by lunar blood, seers of hidden ways, keys to destinies woven in frost and fire. Guilt twisted in his eyes, deeper now, for he had dismissed such tales as hollow myths. Yet here she stood, a rural exile whose defiance had cracked not just stone, but the veil of his isolation. "You are the key," he said, voice rough with the war between duty and this unforeseen tether. Kael's talons reach further than I knew. Without you, the realm fractures, borders bleed, packs turn to war. The bond flared, hot and spiritual, her empathy blooming into understanding. His melancholy was no weakness, but the forge of ethical rule, a king who chose mercy amid guilt's storm. Yet resistance lingered in her, the hollow's freedom clashing with this pull, rationalized as peril's illusion. Moonlight spilled fuller now, silvering the antechamber's ice veins, turning them to threads of fate. Below, the captured spy was dragged away, his curses echoing like fractures in the night. But Brienne saw more, loyalties hidden among Raiden's own guards, a beta's subtle nod to the crimson cloak, a traitor's mark concealed beneath a silver wolf brooch. She met his gaze, hazel fire meeting steel tempest, the revelation binding them tighter. "I'm no queen's pawn," she said, voice steady despite the lunar fire racing through her. "But if the earth speaks truth, then choice is ours, not Kael's, not the moon's alone." Strength, she thought, lay not in the sickle's swing, but in unveiling shadows to claim the light. The wind outside rose to a wail, snow lashing the slit like tears unshed as the fortress trembled faintly. Awake now, to the destiny she had stirred. Raiden nodded, resolve hardening his features, the guilt yielding to purpose. "Then we walk these paths together. Show me the sanctum's door." As they moved, her sense guiding his steps through the branching dark, the bond deepened, not love, but alliance forged in revelation, a redemptive spark amid the gathering storm of betrayal. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the sanctum's concealed door yielded to Brienne's touch like a secret long buried in frost. the quartz veins pulsing faintly under her palm as the stone parted with a sigh that echoed the mountain's weary breath. Moonlight filtered through a narrow fissure above, silvering the threshold and casting their shadows long and entwined across the chamber's threshold. The air within was colder, laced with the ancient scent of beeswax and faded incense, a lunar temple hidden at the fortress's core, walls etched with runes of the Deusa, depicting wolves in eternal chase under a perpetual full moon. Relics gleamed on altars, silver amulets shaped like sickles, vials of blood-red elixir, and a central pedestal bearing a fractured treaty scroll, its edges curled like dying leaves. Raiden's boots scraped softly on the flagstones as he followed, his presence a steady heat against the chill that clawed at her skin. The bond thrummed between them, no longer a mere pull, but a shared rhythm. Her pathfinder sense weaving their perceptions. His guilt, a heavy fog in her chest, her rural resilience, a quiet fire kindling his resolve. Yet resistance lingered, a thorn in her heart. This alliance chained her to his world of wars and whispers, trading the Hollow's open fields for shadowed thrones. Freedom whispered of dissolving the bond, of walking away before lunar fire consumed her choices. They had barely crossed the threshold when the chamber stirred, shadows coalescing into form. A figure emerged from behind the central altar, tall, cloaked in the deep blue of Raiden's own guard, but bearing a brooch that caught the moonlight wrong. A silver wolf with crimson eyes, the traitor's subtle mark her sense had unveiled. It was Thorn, once Raiden's most trusted beta, his face a map of old loyalties scarred by betrayal, eyes hollow with the desperation of a pack fractured by border losses. At his side stood 2 Eastern pack enforcers, their cloaks bearing Lord Kael's talon, blades drawn and glinting like fangs in the silver light. "Sire!" Thorn rasped, voice cracking like ice underfoot, his stance a mockery of deference. The wind outside howled through the fissure, carrying distant weavios that mourned the unraveling oaths. "You've come to the heart of it, then. Kael sends greetings and a choice. The bond you sparked with this rural stray, dissolve it under the Deuce's gaze, or watch the Eastern packs rise. Our borders bleed from your brittle treaties, the Hollows starve while you hoard relics. Join us, or fall." Raiden's hand went to his sword, the leather creaking under his grip, but he held, steel-gray eyes locking on Thorn's with the melancholy of a brother betrayed. Guilt surged through the bond, visceral as blood in Brienne's veins, visions flickering in her mind. Thorn and Raiden as young warriors, sharing mead under the same moon. Packs united until Kael's poisons sowed discord. The king's past confronted him here in this spiritual sanctum, the weight of lost kin and shattered alliances pressing like the mountain stone. "You were pack," Raiden said, voice low and raw, edged with the ethical sorrow of one who had chosen mercy too late in past wars. "I spared your kin after the last border clash, forged peace from their pyres, and this is your repayment. Treason for Kael's crown?" Thorn's laugh was bitter, wind-whipped, as snow flurries danced through the fissure like spectral witnesses. "Mercy? It chained us to weakness. Kael offers strength, war to reclaim the lands your guilt has ceded. This Omega." His gaze slid to Brienne, appraising, laced with the crude hunger of rivals who saw her as leverage. "She's no pathfinder. She's a symptom of your fracture. Bind her by force, and the realm mocks you. Release her, and prove the law bends to consent, not power. But refuse Kael, and blood soaks these stones." The enforcers advanced, blades whispering free, the chamber's air thickening with the scent of oiled steel and impending violence. Brienne's heart pounded, the pathfinder sense flaring, revealing not just paths, but truths etched in the runes. The fractured scroll on the pedestal detailed the forced mating laws, ancient edicts that bound Omegas to Alphas under lunar witness, yet whispered of a Deusa's clause for dissolution, requiring mutual consent and a blood oath under the moon. Her latent gift pulled at her, urging revelation, but fear coiled deeper. To aid Raiden meant embracing the bond, surrendering her freedom for his redemption. To withhold it invited war, Pax tearing at the realm's throat, her hollow reduced to ash. One enforcer lunged, his blade arcing toward Raiden in a crimson arc, but the king parried with a clash that rang like a death knell, sparks flying bright as fireflies in the gloom. Brienne dodged back, her hand finding a relic amulet, a sickle-shaped silver pendant, cool and resonant, symbol of the earth's unyielding cycles. She swung it not as weapon, but talisman, the quartz in its hilt humming as her sense guided her. A hidden lever in the altar, triggering wards that could seal the chamber or unleash lunar wards, blinding light or binding vines of ice. "Choose!" Thorn snarled. Circling as steel met steel, Raiden's movements fluid yet burdened, each strike laced with the guilt of confronting his past. Blood welled from a shallow cut on the king's arm, warm and coppery, dripping onto the flagstones where it mingled with melting snow from the fissure, a visceral symbol of the realm's wounds. The bond amplified it all. Brienne felt the slash as her own. Empathy twisting into a moral storm, forgive Thorn's betrayal for peace, or wage war that would claim innocence like her mother in the Hollows. Love this king, incomplete and volatile, or claim liberty by severing the tether, leaving him to his solitary throne? Raiden disarmed the first enforcer with a roar that echoed the wolves' chorus, sending the blades skittering across the runes. But Thorn pressed, his face twisted in agonized loyalty. The packs wait outside, Kale's host at the gates. Dissolve the bond here, under the Dusa, or we burn the fortress from within. The second enforcer feinted toward Brienne, his eyes gleaming with the rival's ambition, forcing her to the altar's edge. In that heartbeat, as moonlight crested the fissure in a silver flood, illuminating the blood-smeared stones, Brienne's choice crystallized, not immediate love, but the ethical precipice. Compassion over power, redemption through forgiveness, yet at freedom's cost. She gripped the amulet, the sickle's curve biting her palm, and pressed the lever. Ice vines erupted from the walls, coiling around the enforcer's legs, their cries muffled as lunar light blinded. Revealing Thorn's hidden loyalties, a crimson tattoo beneath his sleeve, pulsing with Kale's dark right. Raiden pinned Thorn against the pedestal, sword at his throat, but hesitated, breath ragged, guilt warring with duty. "Mercy again?" he murmured, eyes meeting Brienne's across the chamber, the bond a bridge of fire and frost. She nodded, the wind wailing outside like a dirge for choices unmade, snow lashing the runes as if the Dusa herself wept. Forgiveness could crown peace, but war's shadow loomed. Kale's host, the pack's fury, her own heart's fragile liberty hanging in the balance. Thorn slumped, defeated, as guards' shouts echoed from distant halls, drawn by the fray. Yet the dilemma lingered, spiritual and raw. Sever the bond to save the realm from civil war, or embrace it, remaking laws in consent's image, risking all for a union born of defiance. Blood pooled at their feet, the moon's gaze unyielding, demanding judgment, not of blade, but soul. Strength, Brienne realized amid the chamber's trembling hush, was choosing the scar of mercy over the blade's clean cut, yet at what rebirth's price? The sanctum's lunar light waned as clouds swallowed the moon's edge, casting the chamber in deepening indigo, where the ice vines from Brienne's lever gleamed like frozen veins, binding the fallen enforcers in crystalline restraint. Their labored breaths mingled with the wind's mournful howl through the fissure, snowflakes drifting in like ethereal mourners, settling on the blood-smeared flagstones. Brienne's hand trembled from the amulet's recoil, the sickle-shaped silver now warm in her palm, its curve a talisman that pulsed with the earth's unyielding rhythm. Harvest and wound intertwined. The Pathfinder's sense ebbed, leaving her hollowed, the revelations a weight she could not unfeel, loyalties fractured like the treaty scroll, Kale's shadow coiling through the fortress's every crack. Raiden held Thorn against the pedestal, the beta's throat bared to the sword's edge, a thin line of crimson welling where steel kissed skin. The king's breath came ragged, chest heaving beneath the scarred leather, his steel-gray eyes locked on his former brother's face. A mirror of guilt that twisted deeper through their bond, flooding Brienne's chest with the ache of shared betrayal. She felt it all. The young warrior's bond forged in border mud, the pyres of kin lost to Raiden's merciful truces, now poisoned by Kael's whispers. Melancholy radiated from him, ethical and raw, a ruler who had chosen peace over conquest, yet reaped only thorns. "Speak your truth, Thorn," Raiden murmured, voice a gravelly thunder, the blade steady, but his heart fracturing. "Was it always Kael's talon in your shadow, or did my mercy carve this path?" Thorn's eyes, once fierce with pack loyalty, now gleamed with desperate fire, his body slack against the stone, but spirit unbowed. "Your mercy was a chain, sire. The eastern packs starve under treaties that bleed us dry, hollows raided for grain, borders ceded to rivals who laugh at your guilt. Kael offers fire, not frost. Dissolve this bond with the Omega here under the Deuce's runes and prove the law's farce. Force it, and the packs rise, civil war to remake the realm in blood, not parchment." His gaze flicked to Brienne, not with hunger now, but pity laced with scorn. "She's no key, she's your fracture, a rural ghost to haunt your throne." The words struck like wind-lashed snow, stinging Brienne's skin, her hazel eyes narrowing against the chill that seeped from the walls. The bond thrummed, amplifying Thorn's accusation, pulling her into Raiden's storm, duty warring with desire, the volatile tether a lunar fire that burned without warmth. She stepped forward, boots crunching on frost-dusted stone, the amulet heavy as a crown she never sought. Freedom clawed at her. Dissolve it all, flee to the hollow's open fields, leave this king to his wars. Yet the Pathfinder sense whispered deeper truths. Hidden passages beyond the sanctum led to Kael's host, massing at the outer gates, their torches a crimson sea under the obscured moon, ready to shatter the realm if the bond endured as symbol of Raiden's weakness. Guards burst through the revealed door at last, their armor clanking like chains, faces pale under helms as they seized the bound enforcers. Shouts echoed from the corridors, more traitors uncovered. The armory's flames quenched, but the air thick with smoke's bitter residue. Raiden lowered his sword, the blade dripping red onto the runes, a visceral offering to the Deusa. He bound Thorn's wrists with silver cord from the altar, the beta's slump, a defeat that mirrored the king's own bowed shoulders. "Take him to the cells," Raiden commanded, voice edged with sorrow, not triumph. "No execution, not yet. Mercy has failed us once, let it judge again." As Thorn was dragged away, his parting glare burned into Brienne, a promise of storms yet to break. The chamber emptied, leaving them alone amid the relic's silent vigil, the fractured scroll unfurling slightly in the draught, its ink faded like old wounds. Raiden turned to her, the bond a silver thread tightening in the hush, his face etched with the melancholy of choices deferred. Blood from his arms soaked his sleeve, the scent coppery and intimate, mingling with pine smoke that clung to his skin. "You unveiled him," he said, stepping closer, the heat of him a counter to the sanctum's bite. "The tattoo, the paths, your sense saved this night. But Kael's host gathers, the packs demand judgment, dissolve the bond by dawn, or war consumes us. Law binds me to claim you, forced under lunar witness, yet..." His voice trailed, guilt shadowing his eyes, the ethical king surfacing through the warrior's mask. "I will not cage what defies me. Consent, not power. Remake the edict, if the Deusa wills." Brienne's heart pounded, the amulet's quartz humming against her chest, her sense stirring visions of the hollow. Her mother's face gaunt in the frost, fields trampled by invading paws. The bond resisted her still, rationalized as peril's forge, yet empathy bloomed, seeing his fractures, the guilt that made him choose mercy amid ruin. Love was no reward here, but redemption's trial. Forgive the past's ghosts, unite against Chaol, or sever the tether and ignite civil war, her freedom bought with the realm's blood. The runes speak of a clause, she replied, voice steady as the earth's core, tracing the scroll's edge where silver ink gleamed. Blood oath under the moon, mutual, not forced, but it demands sacrifice, a piece of self, lunar fire to seal or break. Outside, the wind rose to a frenzy, Wevios piercing the gale like souls in torment, snow battering the fissure as if the Deusa raged against indecision. Ryden knelt by the altar, drawing a dagger from his boot, its blade catching the returning moonlight in a prismatic flash. He sliced his palm, blood welling dark and deep, dripping onto the scroll where it sizzled faintly, runes awakening in crimson glow. Then choose with me, he urged, extending the hilt, his gaze a tempest of hope and dread. The bond flared, visceral, her veins alight with his pain, the wars that scarred him, the kin he could not save. Compassion warred with liberty. Embrace this union, remake the law in consent's fire, and crown redemption, or refuse, dissolve in solitude, leaving him to war's maw and her hollow to flames. She took the dagger, the weight familiar as her lost sickle, and pressed its edge to her skin. The cut burned, blood mingling with his on the parchment, the air shimmering with spiritual heat. Yet as the runes pulsed, a deeper tremor shook the sanctum, not choice resolved, but revelation deferred. Chaol's true talon hidden not in packs, but in the king's own bloodline, a bastard brother's shadow waiting to strike. The bond held, incomplete, demanding one final judgment, sacrifice for union or freedom's war. Strength, Brienne felt in the blood's warm flow, was not mercy's crown alone, but the courage to burn for rebirth, even as the moon veiled her face in storm. The fortress groaned under the gathering host, the night alive with the dilemma's ethical roar, their fates suspended in silver and red. The sanctum's runes blazed with the mingled blood's crimson fire, a visceral alchemy that scorched the air and sent shadows fleeing across the ice-veined walls like defeated specters. Brienne's palm throbbed, the dagger's bite a sharp echo of her lost sickle, its warmth seeping into her veins where the Pathfinder sense coiled tight, unveiling the final fracture. Chaol was no distant rival, but kin, Ryden's bastard brother, sired in the border war's shadowed aftermath, his crimson talon a twisted claim on the throne. The revelation crashed through the bond, her empathy drowning in the king's guilt, a torrent of unspoken truths. The treaty's brittleness forged not just from mercy, but from Ryden's deliberate blindness to family blood turned venomous, a sacrifice to preserve the realm's fragile peace. She dropped the dagger, its clatter swallowed by the wind's furious wail outside, snow lashing the fissure in furious sheets that dusted the altar like ash from a pyre. The fortress groaned deeper now, vibrations rippling through the stone as Chaol's host hammered at the outer gates, their war cries a guttural chorus mingling with the Iron Fang's Wevios, wolves howling for the moon's hidden face. Brienne's breath came in ragged bursts, the metallic tang of blood thick on her tongue, her hazel eyes locking with Ryden's in the rune's flickering glow. His face, pale and etched with the melancholy of revelations too late, held no command now, only the raw vulnerability of a king stripped bare, his steel-gray gaze pleading for the choice that would either heal or shatter them both. "The blood speaks," she whispered, her voice a thread against the storm, the amulet's quartz humming hot against her chest like a second heart. The bond surged, lunar fire weaving through her core, not as cage but as mirror, reflecting his ethical torment, the weight of kin betrayed, packs poised on war's precipice. Freedom tempted her still, a siren's call to sever this tether under the Deuce's claws, to flee into the night and reclaim the hollow's frost-bitten fields, leaving Riden to face his brother's blade alone. Yet compassion burned fiercer, born of the earth's unyielding cycles. Rejection had exiled her, but rebirth demanded union, not forced, but forged in consent's flame, remaking the law to crown mercy over power. Love here was no gentle reward, but redemption's forge, a trial where sacrifice tempered the soul. Riden rose from his kneel, bloodied palm outstretched, the wound a stark red against his scarred skin, pine smoke and copper mingling in the air between them. "Kale, my shadow," he rasped, the admission cracking like ice under boot, guilt flooding the bond until her knees weakened. "I knew of him, buried the truth to spare the pack's division. But he twists it now, uses our bond as pretext to claim what's not his. Dissolve it, Brienne. Save yourself. The realm's war is mine to bear, not yours to chain." His words sliced deeper than any blade, stirring the hollow's ache in her chest, the raid's irons, Ilara's cry, her mother's distant plea amid the snow. But the Pathfinder sense pulsed onward, guiding her gaze to the fractured scroll, its runes awakening fully under their blood seal. The Deuce's clause not for dissolution alone, but for rebirth, a union that dissolved the old edict, binding not by force but by choice, lunar witness to a new law where consent wove the pack's fates. Outside, the gates shuddered under battering rams. The crimson sea of torches illuminating the night like hellfire, Kale's voice booming through the gale, a brother's taunt laced with ancient grudge. "Brother, yield the Omega, or watch your mercy burn." Brienne stepped into his space, the heat of him a bulwark against the sanctum's deepening cold, her fingers closing over his wounded hand. Their blood mingled anew, slick and warm, the contact igniting the bond into full blaze, visceral, spiritual, a silver cord that bridged exile and throne. Empathy crested, her rural resilience meeting his dutiful melancholy in a shared pulse. He saw her defiance not as provocation, but as the earth's mercy, a key to heal the fractures he had wrought. "No dissolution," she said, voice steady as mountain roots, the wind's howl fading to a hush in her ears. "We remake it. Consent crowns us, not law's iron. Sacrifice the old ways, your guilt, my freedom, and birth something unyielding." Ryden's breath hitched, his free hand cupping her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness born of the night's forge, rough calluses soft against her skin. The bond completed then, not in lust's rush, but in redemption's quiet fire, lunar light piercing the clouds to flood the chamber in silver purity. He nodded, resolve hardening his features, the melancholy yielding to purpose as he drew her close, foreheads touching amid the relic's glow. Under the Deusa, then, blood and choice, union to bind the packs, not break them. Together, they pressed their palms to the scroll, the runes flaring bright as the amulet shattered in her grip, its quartz fragments scattering like stars across the stone, symbol of cycles broken and reborn. A tremor shook the fortress, not ruin, but release. Wards ignited along hidden paths, unveiling Kale's infiltrators in a cascade of ice and light, guards swarming to turn the tide. The gates held, the host faltering as Ryden's voice boomed from the battlements, amplified by the sanctum's magic. "The law remade, no forced bonds, consent or exile for all who defy it. Kyle, face me as brother, not traitor, under mercy's moon." The night shifted, war's roar ebbing to stunned silence, snow falling softer now, blanketing the bloodied fields in white forgiveness. Brienne felt the rebirth in her bones, the hollow's call answered not in flight, but in alliance, her Pathfinder sense extending beyond stone to weave loyalties anew. Ryden's arm encircled her, the bond a steady warmth, love accepted at last as proof, not prize, redemption through shared scars, compassion's crown over power's throne. The moon emerged full, her gaze benevolent on the united realm. Wevios rising in triumphant chorus as the fortress stood unbowed, flames of renewal flickering in every shadowed hall. In that silver hush, strength revealed itself, not in sickle's swing or sword's clash, but in the choice to heal what was torn, birthing a legacy from exile's frost. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.